So thank you everyone for joining us today. I am really excited to be able to interview one of our successful students, Sherry. And so we're just going to talk a little bit about Sherry's journey and where she's headed from here. And hopefully you find that informative and instructional. So first off, Sherry, thank you so much for joining me today. I really, really appreciate you being here.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you. So what are you finishing up? What are you doing right now before you move on to the big journey that is med school?
So I just graduated and completed my 4 years of the Bachelor of Health Sciences honors program at the University of Calgary. So it was really exciting to wrap that up. And then I'm just working on finishing up two of my research projects before I head to med school.
Oh, what are the research projects, if you don't mind me
Yeah,
asking?
for sure. One of them is a continuation of my thesis honors project. It's with the Human Performance Lab at the U of C, and it's a project about muscle mechanics. So we're just adding a little bit more onto that and turning it into a paper for my thesis. And then the second one is a community engagement project with immigrant and refugee youth in Calgary.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
amazing.
so two different things, but
Yeah, very different, but a lot of breadth there and surely a
Mhm.
lot of depth as well. That's
Mhm.
fantastic. So, you applied and you were successful. Was this your first
Yes.
time applying to med school?
No, I did apply in my third year of
Mhm,
undergrad. No luck there. I think I learned a lot though, and I'm glad I did do it. The
mhm,
application was definitely a little scrambled, and I think I rushed through it and didn't think through all of it properly. But I'm
mhm.
glad I had that experience because I knew what not to do the next time, and thankfully it did work out. And I'm glad I do recommend to everyone, even if you don't feel prepared and you feel like you're kind of just throwing something together, you're still learning a lot through that process. And you might not have the highest hopes, but you never know. Like it could still turn out in third year. So I'd still recommend for everyone to do that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I've done a few of these interviews now, and I don't think any of them have been first-time applicants. There have been a lot of people who went through the process once and were able to take it as that great learning and growing
Mhm.
experience, and were able to put together something better for it the next year. And I'm sure you did practice with us, and we talk a lot in interview prep, especially about thinking through those questions around failures and limitations and all those things that we love talking about in high stress situations like interviews. But we talk about how the most important thing is that you learn from it, that you grow from it, and that you're
Yeah.
able to say, I'm better today for having gone through it, as opposed to sort of dwelling on the fact that you didn't get in or something like that. So I'm glad that resonates.
Yeah. It could be a little disappointing, of course, just getting a couple
Fair.
of rejections. But
That's fair.
the entire application process, there's just so many new parts to like even from the different schools and just being exposed to what that looks like really
Mhm.
helped me. And I was even able to take some parts of that application and just improve upon it. So it did save me a little time as well. And I knew exactly what I wanted to do the next time around.
That's awesome. So, how many schools did you end up applying to?
I applied pretty much all over Canada. It was 8 in total.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and then I got 5 interview offers, but I could only make 4.
Mhm.
And then thankfully accepted at all the ones I interviewed at.
That's amazing. So, you got 4 acceptances.
Yeah,
That's great. And so where did you end up accepting?
I will be going to the U of A.
That's fantastic. Well, congratulations. That's a
Yeah,
huge accomplishment. Getting one acceptance is awesome, of course, but getting 4 and having a little bit of choice in the matter that
yeah,
has to feel really liberating at the end of such a
yeah,
really long process of applying and
yeah.
interviewing.
Yeah, it really does pay off.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. That's a good moral of the story. So what made you decide to pursue med school? And was there a turning point or a sort of aha moment when you knew that this was the path that you were meant to follow?
Mhm. I wasn't one of those kids where I wanted to be a doctor since I was 4 years old. I really wanted to do a little bit of everything. And going into high school, I was playing really competitive basketball, and I really saw that as being in my future. I'd never really thought about medicine before, but I suffered a really bad injury, and it kind of put a stop in that path. And then I had to think about, okay, what else can I do? So I thought if I can still be involved in sports in some way, even if I'm not playing, plus my strength in academics. So that kind of led me to the idea of sports medicine. So
Mm,
that's really what my inciting experience was, I guess, that injury that led me to a very specific part of medicine, but it kind of started that whole journey. And then I continued just kind of through my undergrad, just having increasing my diversity of experience, still having that end goal in mind because I still have that strong interest, but just gathering all the different aspects of what medicine is about, including a lot of the social determinants and things like that I wasn't really aware of going in after high school. I just thought medicine was just all the biomedical stuff and all the hard science, but it's so much more than that. And I'm glad I had my undergrad to experience that. And I just was able to be exposed to everything, but still focus on my interest through research and other extracurriculars. So I think it really kind of came together through that.
Yeah, well, good on you. I mean, that had to be a really hard experience to have your sights on something and have it be interrupted by something like an injury, but it really was, it seems like it was able to motivate you
Yeah,
really
really like a
powerfully.
blessing in disguise.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I love seeing the way that these journeys kind of unfold. Again, so many people, well, it seems it's almost cliche that people have that story. Oh, I knew my entire life from when I was a wee tiny person that I was going to go into medicine. But so many of the students that we talked to, it wasn't that at all. And it was this longer process of really learning what the field of medicine really is in a more expansive sense, and exploring all of those sort of unknown unknowns, right? Those things
Yeah.
that you don't even know enough to know that they exist when you get started, like social determinants of health. Just as someone who's an academic and did a PhD and all of that, I love that idea
Yeah.
of being able to just recognize the massive complexity under the surface of something that seems really straightforward. So that's awesome. So, what did you ultimately find to be the most challenging part of the application or interview process?
I think I'll answer those separately because I think I had different challenges for either
Okay.
one. So for the application, I think it was just or at first, just getting organized. So knowing, what I was planning to put in it, even things such as contacting verifiers and references and transcripts. And I think it was the first time around, it was a lot more than I had expected.
Mhm.
And just being on top of those was a little challenging at first. But again, glad I did that first round because I knew coming into it and starting early, all those different processes. And then secondly, what I challenged with was how to frame my application. And yes, I had these experiences, but how I wanted to present them and tell my story, I guess. And I think that's something I had to go through a lot of revisions and really go through, like, nitpick through my application to see, does this tell my story of how I got here? And is it enough to set me apart and share my unique experiences? Because, or even if you have like, there's those common experiences that a lot of pre-med students have, research,
Mhm.
volunteering, but how to share those through my personal lens to
Mhm.
show them why I did it, what I learned, and where it's brought me. And I think that takes a lot of self-reflection and thinking, and you do have to reach out to others to help you with that as well. So that's something I think was challenging for me, and it can be challenging for anyone, again, to really think on that, to say you have this short window of how you want to show yourself
Mhm.
to the application reviewers. So that was for the application part. And then the interview, so this was my first time interviewing this year. And at first, I was just where to start. There seems like there's just so much advice floating around, and so many resources of what you can do, and just like hundreds and hundreds of pages of scenarios to go through. So I
Mhm.
think really just making a plan of where I wanted to focus and how to. I'd only had a couple months really to practice. So what I wanted to prioritize and how I wanted to practice. And I think that's where the prep company really came in to play. That's because I was so lost. It's the first time I really sought out some help with the prep company, BeMo. I honestly I wasn't even aware of it at the application time, so I may have used it if I knew. But at the interview stage, I knew I needed some extra support and help. So I think BeMo was really helpful in just getting me started, and then I
Mhm.
could really choose on how I wanted to progress with all the preparation.
Yeah, and we can talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I want to focus really quickly on something you were saying in terms of the
Mm-hmm.
application process.
Yep.
One of the things that I really love,
Mm-hmm.
I help obviously at BeMo with looking through people's essays and stuff, but
Yeah.
I love how much it's not just, like you said, an essay, it's telling your story.
Yeah.
And the entire process of application itself is kind of this process of introspection and self
Mm-hmm.
reflection and figuring out who you are, who you want to be, what you want to be for others. And it's just really cool to me that something that seems so practical, right? An application to go to school to study certain things can actually be this really expansive and potentially beautiful reflective process. I think you learn a lot about yourself
Yeah.
as you learn to articulate those
Mm-hmm.
things.
And that's why it can also be a lot more challenging than you may think. It's not just throwing everything you've done over the past 4 years and filling a bunch of boxes. And it's a lot more than that. And I think that's what really separated my first and second time, because I'm pretty sure that's essentially what I did the first time. I didn't think
Mhm.
about it that much. And I just said, oh, I did this, this, and this.
That's
Maybe that's
right.
enough. But I think second time around, I really knew that I wanted to really show why and how I did these things.
Yeah, it's not just a
Yeah.
relisting of your CV in
Yeah.
sentence form. It's actually
Yeah.
something you need to develop into a narrative. So you worked with BeMo on your
Mhm.
interview prep. What was
Yeah.
that like for you, and what surprised you about the process, if anything?
Hmm. So when I started reaching out or thinking about doing any prep courses, I actually started with two companies. I
Mhm,
started with BeMo and another one because I wanted to see what both were like. So I just got the one at just one session for each. And
mhm,
what really impressed me about BeMo was how professional and organized it was, and how a concern I had was, since you were working with different people each time, that there may not be um, continuity, or you might not see that step-by-step progress that you might see with just working with a single person. But
mhm,
I guess what I was surprised is that it was so good. Each time I knew that my notes were passed on um, between the people I was working with, and they always knew what I had done previously, what I needed to work on. So I never felt that I was starting fresh with any new individuals I was working with. So that I was really impressed with that, and just the extra resources that were offered were really amazing. And you could choose what you wanted to focus on, but everything was available to you.
mhm. Yeah, that's one thing that we try really hard to do. We know that access to these kinds of preparation programs can
Yeah.
be limited. And so trying to put together a lot of free resources that can supplement that or that are just available to the public is a huge part of what we try to do. Actually, most of
Yeah.
my job is putting together all those free resources
Mhm.
just to try to help people better understand that process. And yeah, I'm glad that you found that continuity, even working with multiple consultants and experts.
Mhm.
Each of us has our own area of specialization,
Yeah.
our own background, and things like that, but they all complement each other really well. And so I think that's just one thing that we have that's a strength as a team is that we're able to bring our rather diverse backgrounds together in really meaningful ways. So I'm glad that was your experience. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Great. So you talked about this a little bit, but maybe you can expand on it. What have you learned ultimately from this process? And if you had one piece of advice for people who are trying to put together applications right now, what would that be?
So again, I think we touched on this. There's just the self-reflection aspect of it, and realizing that that might be the most important part of the application process, and that's really what they want to see, is how can you reflect on what all your accomplishments over the past few years and frame them in a way, presenting your application. And I think what I learned was that it's important to do that, and it takes time. You really have to start early and go through things again and again, because some ideas pop in your head. You may have not remember something, or you may just come up with better ways um, to frame your story. And my advice would just be, again, for applicants to tell your story, not one of what you think a typical pre-med applicant is, or not what you think that the application reviewers want to hear. They want to hear your story. So make sure you include, if you have any personal or quirky hobbies, even if
Mm-hmm.
it's not health related or medical related, include those in your application and make sure you explain why those are important to you, because they still contribute to you as a person and as a well-balanced individual. And I think that's something that helped me, because I really was able to, again, some of my sport activities include
Mhm.
those, because while those aren't those typical research or volunteering activities, that is really important to me and makes me who I am. So I think including those and making sure that you include any opportunities you've had that are maybe unique or different and help you not only stand out, but frame you as a applicant as a whole.
Mhm, mhm. And I think that's really great advice, especially with the application essay, which is always such a challenge.
Mhm.
They want to see who you are sort of at your core, not just what you've done. And
Yeah.
so that's why relating experiences that maybe aren't directly related to healthcare is actually a great idea, drawing on that, because you're ultimately showing what you value, what you prioritize, the ways that you've challenged yourself. And of course, not all of those are going to happen in the context of medicine, healthcare, or even school itself. And if you're only trying to present that really narrow window, then you're just going to present sort of a partial version of yourself as opposed to your whole complexity. And
Mhm.
that's really what they want to see. They want to see that you're aligned with the mission, vision, values of the school and with the profession of healthcare in general. So that's amazing
Yeah.
advice. Thank you.
And then just, I guess I was only talking about applications, but just translating to the interview, still, yes, you're going to be thrown with these different scenarios, but try to just intertwine it if you have any personal experience, or if you can add any personal touch to the different interview questions, that adds a lot.
Mhm.
Because the interviewers are going to be hearing a lot of those cookie cutter responses, especially to some of those ethical scenarios. There's a general way of answering them that they're going to hear over and over. But what you can do is just add a personal experience or a story or a, anything that you can really think of, because that really helps you not only stand out, but relate to the interviewer. I
Mhm.
had there's a scenario, something about had to do with animals and pets. So I talked about really just for the 10 seconds about my pet, and the interview, I got a smile out of the interviewer. So
There
just
you
like
go. Yeah.
little things you can add, I think makes a big difference. Again, just making it personal, telling them who you are, and that you can still answer the question, but make it personal is really
Mhm.
important as well. Um, and then one more thing for the interview that really helped me was just, I felt a lot of the questions are kind of getting away from those typical ethical scenarios and more, I had a lot of questions just generally about policy or um,
Mhm.
new innovation in healthcare. So I think just keeping up on those topics. Something I did was reading those CMAJ um, magazines that come out with the different articles. They're available online or in print. And they usually talk about a lot of the current issues in healthcare, whether it be MAID or Aboriginal healthcare, a lot of
Mhm.
those topics. And I thought a lot of those came up in my interview. So just being knowledgeable about healthcare in general, again, like the knowing both sides thing, but having your own opinion as well, just to show that you're educated about them and ready to put those values into practice.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's great advice. That's one thing that I talked about this in another interview with
Mhm.
the student, but the fact that, just the prep alone isn't necessarily going to be the end all be all. There's
Mhm.
still legwork that you have to do, which
Yeah,
is why we always assign homework and tell people to read articles, stay up on the
yeah,
news and things like that, because you have to show that you're willing to take that initiative. And if you're able to talk meaningfully about those
yeah,
kinds of controversial topics at this stage in your education, then they know that you're going to put in that work when you're actually going through the med school program and
yeah,
things like that. And yeah, those really challenging policy type questions can be really tough. And that's one where I think a lot of students fall into the trap of saying what they think the interviewer wants to hear,
yeah.
as opposed to taking that time to take a step back, be able
Mhm.
to articulate multiple perspectives while still also maintaining your own perspective and defending that perspective.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, that's the height of critical thinking, is to be able to
Mhm.
step back and articulate in reasonable and respectful ways positions that you maybe don't necessarily agree with, but that are actually valid representations while also being able to maintain your own perspective. And so holding all of those things sort of in the air at once just shows that you can do that kind of nuanced, trenchant thinking that's really necessary to
Yeah.
excel.
And I think that's where some of that background knowledge can really help and just make you feel comfortable in starting that conversation. Even though there's some topics that I didn't know a ton about, but I knew
Mhm.
enough. And I'd read those articles to carry that conversation. And I think it can feel like you're studying or, it can just feel a little academic, but I think
Yeah.
it's important just to be up to date on those things.
Yeah, and if you're serious about going into medicine, well, that's what you're going to have to do. It's a
Yeah.
lifelong learning career, right? You don't memorize a manual and then you're done and you're set for the next 50 years. You have to be dedicated to, and you have to genuinely love that continued learning process. Just as any professional or graduate type program, you have to love what you're learning, and if you don't, you're just going to be miserable.
Yeah, for sure.
Great. So what do you ultimately hope to accomplish as a practicing professional? Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Mhm. 10 years. So I still really have a strong interest in sports medicine. I know that can definitely change through med school, but at this time, I think that is the first experience I hope to have. And down the road, I do want to go into orthopedics, specializing in sports medicine. So in 10 years, hopefully I'll be done. And I'd really like to work with a sports team or with the Olympic team as a team physician.
Nice. That's amazing. I like that you're willing to keep your options open and understand that
Yeah.
it might change while still having a path that you would be very happy following. I think
Mhm.
that balance is really necessary. Having
Yeah.
some idea of where you want to go, but also just being
Yeah.
open to
Always
the
be, yeah,
process.
it's really
hmm
important.
Things change in weird and wild ways
Yeah,
sometimes.
I've heard.
Great. Yeah, I know. Says the person who changed her major halfway through her third year of undergrad. So
Oh,
you
wow.
never know where things are going. I know, right? I went a completely different route and then never stopped going to school. So, you never know where things are going to take you.
It's true.
Great. So, any final words or anything that you'd like to add to inspire the people who might be watching this?
I
No,
think
no pressure.
no, I think through your application process, it can be really hard to do it on your own. And reaching out to family and friends is good, but sometimes you do need professional help. And BeMo is an excellent option. They're so professional and organized, and they can really help guide you step by step while still helping you to make your own application and interview journey, but just giving you a little help along the way. So I think I've had an excellent experience, and I think it's a big part of why I was so successful with my interviews. Having this happen, really putting the work in um, for those couple of months before the interviews. It can feel like a lot if you're still in school, but it is possible. And just setting out that time to practice, to read up, can really make a big difference. And you'll feel so comfortable going into your interview, and you'll even have fun through the whole process. So I'm really thankful to everyone at BeMo. I've been paired with really excellent consultants and had an amazing experience. And I wish everyone the best of luck.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much for that. And of course, we all wish you the best of luck. The
Yeah.
happiest days of our lives are the days that we hear that our students have been accepted and that they're going
Yeah.
to do wonderful things. It's we are all deeply invested in student success, and hearing that students are succeeding is what gets us out of bed in the morning. So thank you again. Thank you again for joining me today and for sharing some of your insights. And best of luck as you go ahead and go down this journey.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you.